Hi, everyone. Hi, I haven't done this over Zoom before. This is going to be weird. Let me try and get my thing showing for you. I made a slide deck. Oh no, screen sharing has been disabled. Uh,
Here, we will pass host over to you so that you'll have.
all right, thank you. I will immediately show pictures of car crashes.
Okay, you should be good now.
Ah, yes. All right, let's see. Does that display, do you see a grotesque orange slide?
Yes, we can
All
see
right,
that.
great. Great. Hi, I'm Ben Burbank. I put together just a quick talk for you guys. It's based on some talks I've given in the past. By the way, let me know if my audio is ever screwed up or anything. I grabbed a bunch of random stuff from our IT bins and don't know if it's all working right. But currently, I'm a programmer at Valve. I'm in the Valve office right now here in Bellevue, Washington. I mostly work on video games. I've done a little bit of Steam stuff, but almost entirely video game stuff. Previously, I worked on a bunch of games at Campo Santo, including in the Valley of Gods and Firewatch. And before that, I was at Double Fine, and before that, I was at EA, going back to the PS2 and Game Boy Advance era. So I've been doing some of this stuff for a long time. And I was going to talk to you guys about basically making video games where characters talk. I don't know levels of experience of who I'm talking to. Actually, I have very little information. I did almost no prep on that side. I apologize. But I assume there's a mix of people who are interested in making video games or programming or 3D art. I don't know. That seems fair. All right, good. I see one nod, and I feel that's good enough. So we're going to be largely talking about games where characters speak like humans, which is it's not really a solved problem set, but there's a lot of solutions out there for different parts of it, and the tools that you would need to do that. And I'm not really going to talk about code examples or like how to be a better writer. There will be a few times in this talk where I probably hint at like, hey, if you do this, it might help your writing. Sorry, I'm trying to move my Zoom box. Oh, it's being annoying. All right, this will do. Because it was covering my notes. All right. But largely it'll be about the other stuff. Also, there are going to be a couple of video clips. I hope they stream fine. In fact, I'm going to restart this stream and make sure I've optimized for video sharing. And then get right back to this. All right. So yeah, sorry, Mom, if you're watching, which she probably isn't. I can make a beep sound if you guys want. I kind of know where the swears are. But one like guiding principle in my career, and that sort of is like the basis of this talk, is that what you choose to make is almost always more important than how you make it. With a caveat, that's really tiny text. I hope that's legible at all. But the caveat being that you can't be a monster at your job. Don't overwork people. Don't abuse people. Don't be a monster. Don't be bad. But assuming you've made a choice on something good to make, some simple tools might actually help make it better. And that has been true at every job I've ever worked at. But first, I'm going to talk about what I mean about talking and speech and conversation. So human speech has rules. There's a lot of built-in pauses when we talk. If you are in a group setting, it's a lot more obvious. If you have like 4 people who are trying to talk about the same thing, you're always waiting or interrupting each other in mixes of rude and jokey ways, but also you have to, like, you can tell when someone is violating that etiquette. So yeah, you don't really, you're not able to listen. Like the human brain isn't able to signal process properly. If you are speaking, you can't listen at the same time. It's the reason I bring this up is it's obvious when you see a video game character who is not listening while it's speaking, or vice versa. So you have to kind of build those etiquette rules into your like video game or product or whatever it is, movies even. And then there's the differences between phone calls in person or these Zoom conferences where I can't see or hear you and I just have to trust that you exist. And I'm probably talking very nervously and weird because of that. And then obviously there are interruptions, those occur, and there are like polite ways to do it where you get someone's attention with a hand gesture or some other thing. But generally, if you're just speaking out loud, interruptions are rare or hard to insert. Also, humans have like great short-term memory. So if they are ever interrupted, they're able to resume what they were talking about. They're able to remember something that just happened 10 seconds ago. You can use that to great effect, like to call back for humor purposes or whatever, but also like a character can say something along the lines of, so anyway, about that job tomorrow, after they've been interrupted by you doing some other unrelated thing. When you're building video game conversations, there are these concepts of barks, which are just like basically player signals. They're effectively sound effects. They're not really like capital D dialogue. Things like enemy spotted or frag out or he's over here, that kind of thing. Soldiers will say that stuff in Halo or Call of Duty all the time. But it's still super important that even if you ever layer those on top of each other the way that you would sound effects, that the player still needs to be able to process what's happening. So a good example of that is like in the Half-Life games, when they were working on Half-Life Alyx most recently, we had like this, there's an alien race who's invaded Earth. They're called the Combine. They should not in any way speak English. That shouldn't be how they talk. And when we first recorded all of their barks and dialogue lines, they spoke in an alien language. And players just had no idea. They never were able to understand that like blah, 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 blah meant that there's a grenade on the ground. So we just replaced everything with English. And our sci-fi writers were sad, but that's going back to players need to understand what's happening. And then conversations can take on many forms. So this probably seems pretty obvious, but you can have full scripted cutscenes, or you can have something where the player is able to participate and reply. One of the games that I worked on is built around that concept, Firewatch, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So when you're building a game like this, almost always you're going to be breaking your whole like pile of content down into a big bundle of lines, like a line just being a single sentence usually. This allows you to store things like subtitles or what animation should play, but there's a lot of reasons that you would want to do this. You would ideally give some unique identifier that's not the actual string content of the line. Lines will be rewritten, rearranged, or repurposed. So for example, if you're building a scene, I'll make up a fake Half-Life example. Gordon Freeman walks into a room and there's he's the player character, and one of the scientists says, "Good morning, Gordon. It's been great to see you." And then later on, we'd figure out, oh, that scene makes a whole lot more sense if it takes place in the evening after some other event. We don't want to have to go and update the database tag for a line that was the content, "Good morning, Gordon," or whatever. It should just be like Gordon greeting scientist. Something human readable can be good, or or just a random GUID is fine. Just a bunch of numbers and strings. So yeah, you'll end up with a huge database of these lines. And the real trick, and this is the stuff that I'll spend most of this talk on, is kind of knowing when and why you would play a specific one. Because you don't write one of these games the way that you write a book or a screenplay. Some games are written that way, and it can be very restrictive on the player. So yeah, there are about 10,000 dialogue lines in Firewatch. I don't have estimates for the other games that I worked on in here, or I can't say them, but it's safe to assume that Firewatch, which is a relatively short game, it's meant to be beat in a couple sittings, so it's a 4 or 5 hour experience, that's on the low side of how a large game would be built. And also, just as some other like asides, when you're sequencing these, I mentioned this, it's not like writing a screenplay. You almost never get to just say, line 1 happens, line 2 happens, line 3 happens. You have to act more like a director, and you have to put in pauses and animations and all kinds of other pre and post delays or other just performance bits. And then if the player can respond to speech and like interrupt or interject or reply to something, let's say they make a selection while someone's still talking, you don't just have the player immediately begin speaking. You're going to need to delay that so that there's a seamless conversation. And then sometimes sometimes the player can interrupt what others are saying, and sometimes they'll even be interrupted by other things, including, like, let's say the player's on the middle of a long paragraph and then they pick up some important object. They might interrupt themselves and say, whoa, I found a bomb or something. That's another state of being. And just real briefly on some of the things that aren't the spoken word, there's face and body acting concerns when you're taking these lines. So every dialogue line in a video game, basically, unless you're smart about your game design, and by smart I might mean lazy or trying to prune down your work, every line's going to end up with some sort of on-screen character acting, probably with face and body animations, which will probably be recorded separately. Those body animations will be recorded in a mocap suit, probably by the same actor, but it depends on who you sign, if they're a good mocap actor versus just a voice actor. And then the facial acting is generally going to be from video recordings. There's a really good talk that I link here. I'll give these slides out, when this is over, if you wanted to watch some of these. But this is a talk on Senua's Sacrifice, which has the unfortunate name Hellblade. But it had really, really good face acting, and their tools are becoming the industry standard. And then on top of all of those other little concerns that I've just sort of addressed, that like localization is a whole other problem. We shipped a version of Firewatch with Chinese audio. We didn't do the like 1970s style overdubbing where it needed to fit in the exact same thing. We allowed the lines to be longer or shorter, depending on what the localization needed. But we had kind of an ideal case because we didn't have any on-screen animation. And face captured animation, where there's like very specific ticks in how someone speaks or how they look, or how they blink and where they're focusing, all that stuff, that can require separate localization data. And the only game I've seen really that did a good job on this is Witcher 3. I mean, obviously there's other AAA games that have done this, but Witcher 3 did it really smartly, I think. There's a link here to their GDC talk that goes into some of their tools, but they built it so that every line of dialogue and every cut inside one of their cutscenes could scale based on the content inside of it. So if the animation got updated, it would scale the voice line to fit at the right times. Or if the voice line got updated, it would scale the animation to fit, and then it would scale everything around that. It was a really cool system. That's a good talk. Pretty complicated. But now I'm going to talk about some video games. And first, I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite kind of video games, sports video games. I know that talking to a bunch of computer science people or college kids, love every sports game, but I don't like them. I don't play them, but I did work on them for a long time, and I can tell you that they have honestly a large and diverse set of tools that are related to storytelling. They have to get the commentators to speak in a semi-human simulation of television. Like they have a perfect thing they're trying to emulate, that everyone is familiar with. Even if they have just a passing familiarity with sports, you can tell when it's broken, basically. So yeah, there's the in-game players, there's coaches, there's crowds that have dynamic audio and animations, all manner of the same problems that you would have making, I don't know, Deathloop or Half-Life basically exist inside of Madden, which was one of the first games I worked on. And some sports are actually going to be easier to achieve this. There's like football and golf and baseball have sort of obvious breaks in play where it's expected that someone's supposed to fill time by speaking, whereas something like soccer or I don't know, basketball, there's not a clear like pause a lot of the time. Action can go on for a long time, and if they just describe what's happening on the field, that can get boring and redundant. It can be kind of like reading slides that you've already written. But here's a clip from a video game. I hope this audio comes through. Oh, that's loud.
First and 10
all right.
At their own 22. They'll run for the first time with Austin Eckler. And they're going to stop him right at the line of scrimmage. Just no cutback lane to be found whatsoever. 2nd and 10.
At the 22-yard
Looked like he was trying to bounce it outside, but no success.
Yeah, sometimes you got to just figure out where you're going to go, and sometimes you just have to take it to another spot. And trying to get it outside, the defensive pursuit was there and just ran him down.
Just past the 50, and he's taken down right at the 45-yard line. Chargers come up 1st and 2.
All right. As just a quick breakdown of that relatively like robotic and normal clip of Madden. So there's all these sort of pieces of state that the speech system's analyzing, where the Chargers are playing at home. It's the 1st and 10. They're on the 22-yard line. They haven't run the ball yet this game. So that I know is going to be a unique identifier on that line because they said they're running for the first time. They tried to run outside to the left and they're stopped again on the 22-yard line. So it's like all of this and definitely a lot more variables are available. And the line that played is basically selected going to be from those examples. On the next play, they do manage to do a catch and the crowd was reacting a lot. So that's sort of an example of like the storytelling systems, the presentation systems at work. It's not just like the numbers on a scoreboard when you play one of those games. So as sort of illustrated there, that there's basically going to be, about this many, about 6 to 10 variables needed to play a single line of simple commentary in a sports title or in a lot of games with dynamic dialogue. And that's not a hard rule. There's like complex lines, and then there's some examples where it gets really, really crazy. For example, let's talk about some queries real quick. So one thing you're going to be doing if you're ever building one of these like dynamic speech or conversation systems, it's always best to take the most specific query. So this is sort of related to how I pointed out there is one variable there that they hadn't run the ball yet that game. That definitely was going to be an additional variable added on to a specific line that pushed it over the top in this specificity ranking. So you might have a line in your game that's like, I'm looking at Dan and I'm holding an apple, and Dan would say, oh, I like apples. But if I'm looking at Dan and I'm holding an apple and I've thrown an apple at Dan in the past, Dan might say, oh, I used to like apples. Like he might be upset at apples when you're holding them now. You can get into these sort of crazy examples where the storytelling is far beyond just like saying what has happened.
2. Now here's the pitch. Off-speed pitch, and there is strike 3 called. And boy, that zone just got a bit larger, 2 away.
Well, that call looked like it was a little in the pitcher's favor, but it wasn't outrageous. Hey, listen, calling balls and strikes is a really tough job, and even the best are going to miss some from time to time.
So in that example, this game MLB, I think this is the show 20, I think it's last year's game. It intentionally made a bad call. Like if you rewatch the clip or whatever, the ball was clearly out of the strike zone, and the game then makes a bad call. They have the in-game umpire, either for whatever simulation reasons or just randomness. He says it's a strike. The players in the game are surprised by this. The announcers are surprised by this and try and explain it away. This would be really frustrating if this happened all the time in a sports game, but it's also, if you ever watch any sporting event or live anything, there's going to be moments like this constantly, just because of, human eyeballs and what people are able to see, going back to perception. No. All right. Sorry. Let's talk about some other games I worked on. So I helped out a little bit on the Broken Age game at Double Fine. It was a classic adventure game. It was designed, to emulate Monkey Island and Grim Fandango, but with some modern stuff like speech and, I guess Grim Fandango shipped with speech, but it was basically like harken back to the old stuff with some modern polish. Its basic like structure of conversing, of like traversing through lines, was effectively these conversation trees. Which I'll show an example of in a second, but it was a fixed perspective game. So you couldn't look specifically at objects. You could click and interact with stuff as the player, but you had just sort of a limited set of verbs. And in a game like that, it would just be literally like, here's a list of dialogue lines that you can say as the player. But this is the start of being able to converse. Like, behold, the simplest and still very good method for dynamic dialogue that players choose. You don't have an infinite possibility space, but you can have jokes inserted in there. You can have serious lines, and since it's a loopable system, like they don't mind if they have to send you back through the conversation tree. It's like a customer service phone tree, basically. You never get stuck. So looking at those two like sort of groups of products, like sports and adventure games, broadly, there's this concept that's starting to emerge that I've like hinted at, which are basically in-game events where something happened, a verb was verbed, and as a result, we need to say or do something, play an animation, or more commonly, in my case, play some dialogue. And these events can come from anywhere. Like a player can throw a soda can at someone's face, or an NPC could finish pathing to their goal, or the player could return to the game from a console that's been asleep. And like, I don't know, there was one of the Mario games on DS, it would, when you opened it up, Mario would say like, welcome back, or whatever. Like those are examples of just anything can be an event, basically. So this is just getting to the list of, in an adventure game, there's just a set of verbs that are possible. They're basically the things you click on, and they result in, you selected something. In a sports game, there are far more technical events that occur, like the ball is moving from one player to another constantly. One person starts running or slowing down, but really the times that the game knows it's time to speak are going to be, when a turn has ended. If you start to think about sports games like turn-based combat, it can help break down your mental model of how they're built. Or a rare but incredible thing has occurred, or time expired or something along those lines. These are just like the idea of basic events. So in walks Valve. This is before I worked there. I've only been here 4 years, I guess. But when they were building Half-Life 2, they wanted a system that could react very, like, in an open-ended manner to events that the player or the world performed. And they came up with a system called response rules, which is basically a scripting engine on top of their entity system. So an event occurs, and then it's going to select an appropriate response using sort of similar query-like rules to how the sports game was doing things. And then one thing that they added to the system that's nice is basically every entity in the game can have memory that can be queried. So like, who were you looking at 3 seconds ago? Or have you ever mentioned that you can heal people? Are examples of things that they're going to get stored in there a lot, or what's your health, that sort of thing. It's a simple system that allowed for very reactive characters, and it was extremely easy for them to add and author content. Here's a link to a GDC talk where I don't remember who. I want to say Rich Lord, but it might have been other people. It was a 2012 GDC talk. The Firewatch team, like, we studied this talk. It's about how the response rules are built, how they work, how their queries are set up. When we were making Firewatch, like, this was the crux for, we could make a system that does that and hopefully push on it a little bit more. And here's just an example from one of those games that used that same like base rule set.
Good morning. You have been in suspension for 50 days. In compliance with state and federal regulations, all testing candidates in the Aperture Science Extended Relaxation Center must be revived periodically for a mandatory physical and mental wellness exercise. You will hear a buzzer. When you hear the buzzer, look up at the ceiling. Good. You will hear a buzzer. When you hear the buzzer, look down at the floor. Good. This completes the gymnastic portion of your mandatory physical and mental wellness exercise. There is a framed painting on the wall. Please go stand in front of it. This is art. You will hear a buzzer. When you hear the buzzer, stare at the art.
So you get the idea. It's a they used their events to track all kinds of things like player position or just everything. And we took that idea and kind of wanted to just blow the doors off a bit. We had a very generic event system, and it's, like I said, it's just effectively identical to the Valve one. Ours had a GUI on top, like with a simple UI. I'll show pictures of it later. It's not very different from just a pure scripting engine. We had a similar concept of memory. We had local and global blackboards, so we could query like world state as well through this system. So we could ask like, what time of day is it? Is it what day of the year is it? That sort of thing. Where's the sun located right now? And we had a huge focus on reactivity. So there were the basic ideas is like, yeah, we're gonna just shove content into a giant pile. I don't know if people here have played Firewatch. I'll show some demos in a second where I illustrate how diverse the player choice can be. And also we had the goal to never ever play a line twice. There are probably like 3 repeated lines, and you have to do some very specific stuff to get them to trigger. And mostly those were put in when we realized like, oh, if you find a deer horn, but you already know that there are antlers in the boxes on day 78, like it gets into a very specific situation where we just forgot to record audio and we're like, well, play the old one again. But generally we don't let that happen. And yeah, this is a first person game where also similar to the old adventure games, basically you can initiate conversation. And in this game, you can call someone on the phone or in the radio and give them and start talking about whatever you're seeing. There's another good GDC talk. This was by 2 of the Firewatch programmers. Firewatch is made by 10 people. 4 of us were programmers, and 2 of them there. So half the team will explain how the system works there. And here is just a simple example of our event system at work.
I'm staring at the big outcropping down here, but I'm not quite sure where to look for our pyrotechnicians.
Maybe keep heading west toward the lake.
Finding a bunch of empty beer cans. They threw them all over hell.
Are you fucking serious?
Yeah, sure am.
People are just the worst, aren't they?
They're not great, no. You know what? Fuck it. I'm not the main. They left half a bottle of whiskey. Decent stuff.
Drunk pyromaniacs. Fucking great.
Oh, look. They decided to have a campfire, too.
You know, they color-coded the fire danger signs in case people were illiterate. But I guess that doesn't take into account just plain stupid, does it?
Found the fireworks. They didn't even try to hide them.
Well, confiscate them.
That probably could have ended poorly. How'd you get fired and wind up in jail all on your first day, Henry? I thought it'd be a good idea to chuck some Roman candles into a smoldering fire pit. Or regular forest burns. Well, they left their clothes out to dry. It looks like 2 people. What if they're naked?
Won't that be exciting? Look, they're obviously still there, so tell them off and then head back.
I found a bra.
A nudie pyromaniac. Remain professional.
There are, panties?
There are what?
I don't want to say that word again.
Why, 'cause you're 12?
I found them in the lake.
Skinny dipping.
Yeah.
Is that a guy over there?
Oh boy. Enjoy dealing with that.
I know you guys are setting up bottle rockets out here, okay?
How? Because you're hiding in the bushes, spying on us? Give him a break, Lily. He probably hasn't seen boobs in 20 years. He's probably still a virgin. Why do guys think it's all right to just stare at girls? Oh,
fool it with the fireworks?
Please just put it down. We won't light anymore. This guy's creepy. You asshole!
Light another firework and it won't be your stereo I wreck.
Fuck you, psycho.
So that was some examples of bad words also. But just as another quick demonstration, I'm going to talk over most of this video. You can also go through that same scene and not report that you found anything to your supervisor, Delilah. She won't know that you've done any of this stuff. You don't confront the kids and explain why you're there. All of those are optional choices that, like, we try and push the player to do, but we don't actually force upon them. And you can just do something completely different.
Full stereo!
Oh, hey, put that down. Whoa, where are you going with that? My stereo. Who the hell are you? You can't just steal from us.
Hey, that go okay?
I hope it drops.
Oh, wow.
But the music is a little loud. I apologize. All right. So, by the way, that was Cheap Talk playing their song Push Play. You should buy that on Bandcamp. So some real quick learnings when we were building out a game like Firewatch. We often, because people were talking and walking, we had to time our conversations so that they would fit if we knew that they were going from, like, let's say the Firewatch tower to the first place on their map. We know roughly how many footsteps that is, roughly how long it takes to walk. And if they're supposed to discover something when they arrive there, it would be annoying if they were still talking about something else. So we often had to, like, trim lines down to fit. And to that point, one thing that we found very critically is that no matter what the line is, always get multiple recordings. Like, this is normal for directors or anyone making TV or movies, but in video games, a lot of the times it's like, well, they said it and it matches the mood that I need right now, so we've accomplished what we need. But we discovered that having angry versions of lines or faster or slower versions of lines, or just like reduced the number of words in them, was always extremely valuable. And we could switch based on the situation to have people delivering a different version of the same quote unquote line. Yeah, and one real big problem is that if players are able to do kind of whatever they want, it can be challenging to get them to do what the game wants. They could just, it's kind of like watching someone playing D&D, where you got to railroad them a bit, and it can be challenging. Real quick, I'll just talk about Half-Life Alyx, which is the most recent game I worked on here. Most recent game that shipped. I guess I worked on Dota Underlord some at the start of the pandemic. Anyway, but Half-Life Alyx was the last big one. It started as a VR shooting gallery and demo. It did not intend to have a story, but eventually they ended up building out about like a 10-hour experience using the Half-Life 2 tools. And they had a written story, but they didn't end up liking that. And a lot of the Campo crew was involved in coming in and replacing it in the last 14 months before ship. So we just completely scrapped what was there. Again, going back and using those response rule tools that the same basic ones from Half-Life 2 even were still, they've been updated over the years, but it's basically still a scripting system like that. That's not an ideal way to build a video game with a story, but there's a really good demo app that you can watch, I guess, or documentary, I guess, on Steam. Jeff Keighley put this together. We told him the truth on how everything went, and he has a good timeline and how and what sort of things like people did to contribute. If you're ever curious about like Valve game development, it's good. We are coming up on the end of when I was hoping to finish talking, so I'm going to breeze through some of this stuff real quick. So one thing you can do when you want to improve a story is sort of playtest, like running someone who doesn't know what to expect through the events of what's happening, and then ask them just an infinite amount of questions. Ask them so many questions, and really the best stuff that you can get out of these is for them to tell you, like, why were you trying to do whatever you're trying to do, and then describe like objects in the scene, describe the scene to me, tell me what you saw, especially if they didn't do what you wanted. It's critical to learn what they think is important because of like visual pop or things that have fallen into the background for you as the content creator. And you'll always be able to then like go back and retune the scene. You'll know like, oh, they found that this apple tree was super important, so either we should put in some content about the apple tree, or maybe we should make the apple tree look less important, like make it a dead tree or something. I don't know what there's always a lot of fixes for problems. Finding them is honestly the hardest thing, I think. Coming up with ideas tends to be pretty easy. And then yeah, just like having a like improv like environment for your team is it's really healthy. Bringing in anybody basically to like the whole team together to just like watch a scene play out or watch a play test or something, and then come up with ideas for like, oh, it'd be cool if when, you know, if I throw the can at the person that they're upset. Like that's a simple like human response. It's always weird in a video. It's funny in a video game when they don't react, but it's really funny in a video game when they do react, because it feels like the game is playing along with whatever the player's trying to do. Like this is sort of critical on our Firewatch. Our game did pretty well, and I think one of the big reasons is we put a ton of that stuff early in the game so that people just thought we were magicians or something, and by the end of the game there's far less like massively branching scenarios, but they've already been tricked into thinking we're good at our jobs. So just really try and empower your writers or anybody who wants to get ideas in the game, like the Ratatouille guy would say. And then real quick here, I'm just gonna like breeze through some screenshots of some tools, and then we're gonna go to questions. So this is like what a response rules tool looks like. That might be too blurry, but hopefully you can see it. It's again, it's just a script where it lists out like, here's a line. The coach is going to help somebody. Let's say he's going to help the gambler, which in this is a Left 4 Dead file. The gambler was Nick, I guess. He's gonna say this line if the ally is dying and the entity in question is coach, and he has not said that he can help, and the end of the character's health is half what it should be from the gambler. Like it's just a list basically, right, of these criteria. And then at runtime, we would put together a fast way to query this massive database space. But that Valve Talk previously talks about that a bit. As mentioned, the Firewatch tool. This is us re-implementing basically the Left 4 Dead concepts, but we did it with this is a very good GUI. It's very good, and you should make them look better than this. But under the hood, all this data is it's used to play everything that you see in the game, including animations and voice lines and things like that, down to like change the time of day now. It's also it was just a simple JSON script under the file, so it's not that different from the response rules thing that Valve was using. But this JSON format, like just a simple file format, helped us build other tools on top of it, or load them in like future pipelines, such as in the Valley of Gods. This is very tiny. We'll just ignore how tiny it is, but basically this is what we did after Firewatch. We made a nicer tool with like visual timelines, and we had to handle a lot more state in that game that unfortunately never came out. I don't know that I can talk about why, but we'll see if we get to questions. And we added icons and all kinds of just nicer timeline sequencing after having been in the space for a long time. Here's a picture from the Witcher one, which I mentioned before was extremely, extremely good. Theirs was a very timeline focused editor, and you could drill into any of those. And then I'll leave this part for later, but if you have any like real desire to build these kinds of systems, first off, there were some tool recommendations there that I can answer if people have more questions, but really please get good at this and then come work with me, because there's not enough people making these kinds of tools regardless of what the job is. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go to questions. Hello. Oh, do I call on people?
You can call on people if you'd so like. I think we'll give the first one to William because he had his hand up before I could even unmute the microphone.
All right, let's have it.
Is my microphone working?
Yes.
Okay, so this is mainly in regards to sort of like an engine development thing. So how would you, if you were to make a dialogue system like this, is it worth investing in some kind of fancy, expensive middleware sound system like WIs or any of those? Because I personally hate WIs. I think it's literally the worst thing ever from just like a file management standpoint. And if you delete your project files, it's a nightmare to get back to the original sound files just in this dumb format. So is it worth it, or is it like the stock Unreal 4 sound system or the stock Unity sound system good enough?
So that's an excellent question. We shipped with WIs, but we had specific requirements. I didn't select it. And for future projects, I haven't used it. Audio designer people love WIs because it's kind of like abstracting out a lot of tools that normally they wouldn't have access to. They'd have to pre-mix a lot of that stuff. And WIs is basically an audio editor on top of being an event, like an audio event system. It's also a huge pain to ship on consoles. So it's a wash. I think that Unity and Unreal both like take it very seriously that they can do better. And the new Unreal tools that I don't remember if they're just in 5 or if they were just added to the latest drop, look really nice. And they've got even like synthesis stuff so you can make sound at runtime. So
ooh, wow.
Yeah, new Unreal tools seem good. I probably shouldn't, I don't know, but we don't use Unreal here, but it looks good.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to compiling Unreal 5 yet. I gotta sit down and do that this weekend or something. All right, but thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I ever do get around to making a commercial game like this, I probably will invest in some fancy third-party sounds, even if it is a nightmare for modders.
I would say what it's really good for would be if you're working with a third-party audio company. So in our case, we had someone who was cutting our dialogue lines for us. So we would go into the recording studio and we would work directly with the actors. And then we would say, here's a 6-hour-long WAV file, please make lines out of it to another company. They would go and mix it and they would cut out all the bad lines, bad takes, and give us a project back. And they loved WIs because that's how it does only the things that they care about. So that was a use case for that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I will definitely consider that and keep that in mind. And thank you for coming to talk to us.
Yeah, sure.
All right, next question. Oh, yes, go for it, Anderson.
What is your solution to the classic situation where a player can repeat an action and they expect a voice line every time?
Yeah. It's not great. My ideal solution to this is to take away that ability after a while. So break, like, I don't know, let's say they open and close a door in front of an NPC or something, and eventually move the NPC so the player can't get to it or something. Because eventually you're going to run out of content. If you have the goal of not looping, you're going to run out of content. The other option that you could do is like what classic adventure games do, which is hide something in there after they've done it 200 times or some ridiculous thing, because you're rewarding their bad behavior. I think that is sort of always my pitch is you don't need to reward everything negative that a player can do inside your game space, but every now and then if you do it, they will be delighted. That's all.
Do you ever regret your decision of not looping voice lines?
I don't. I think it's important. I think that if you play, like, let's go back to just even like sports games, which I've already like explained, I don't like them. But let's say that you go back and play early PS2 era games where they had so little memory and the disk size was limited. They will say the same, like, and when you talk about precision passing, that's what you mean after like every 10th pass. And it's grating. Like, it takes you out of the experience entirely. It's not as bad with like a bark, like, hey, get over here, hey, get over. But if they're just sitting there looping the line, hey, get over here, even you're going to notice that it's not a real person, like, very quickly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do have one more if no one else has anything.
I'm going to say go for it.
Ezra, what's the word?
Go for it. I'm sure we'll have it after, but go for it.
You mentioned earlier that you would sometimes trim down audio lines for when the geometry didn't match the length of the audio.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to ask the level editors to design more geometry for when you needed more space for that storytelling?
Yeah, in Firewatch specifically, we didn't have enough time to do that a lot, but what we would do, which is sneaky, is we would like slow the player down a little bit. If you do it a lot, they'll notice it. So we'd be like, well, this line, the shortest we can possibly make this concept of this conversation is 1:20 or whatever. And they can run from here to there in 1:08 if they book it. So it's like, well, if they're running, maybe we have them, like we put a log in the way that they have to jump over, or we slow down their walking some other way, which just forces the player to not be able to do it. But absolutely, in a large enough budget, like Firewatch, we started that game and we had 2 years of money, and that was it. Like it has to come out in 2 years from day one, and we never had time to go back and fix that kind of stuff, so we always had to do the cheapest solution. But on a Half-Life game or something, we would definitely spend a little extra time. Sometimes we'd even rewrite the whole story because it's not good enough.
All right.
So in a lot of games, especially if I guess they're working on a smaller budget or like smaller memory, you'll have like dialogue options you see, but it's clear like no matter which one they pick, they wrote the story about one, but tried to get the response to fit both. But you can kind of tell which one that they wanted you to pick. How do you like if you do have to do something like that due to whatever constraints? How do you like write it in such a way or make it in such a way so that even if you pick both dialogue options, it feels like you picked the correct one instead of just being like, oh, obviously they wanted me to use the other one.
Yeah, I understand that question. That's an excellent thing. The original Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior, I guess in the US, you can refuse the quest in like the first 5 minutes, and the king will just say, "But thou must," over and over again until you say yes. In modern games, the thing that I would say, I noticed this in like a Mass Effect or something. It'll happen, that kind of thing. My inclination, like again, this gets into quality writing, would be, first off, try not to make them seem that gray area, but also you can like play, like it's going along with, like, if they're going to misbehave, right, like they're going to choose chaos, or even if both options make sense, right, like, I don't know, we're not going to rescue the people because there's not enough time, or whatever the thing is a Spider-Man might encounter or something. You can try and play in their space a little bit, right? So like if you have the time and the budget, so again, I know that was part of the limitation of your question, so I have to choose one thing to push on, would be to add even just one more line of dialogue or something that explains, like, oh, but wait, if we do that, that's going to cost us like problems, like that's going to really hurt us if we do this. And then like basically try and convince the player to have the good idea on their own. Might be a suggestion. I don't have a lot of great answers to this, though. This is a tautological problem that is challenging.
All right, Cooper.
So in Portal 2, there's this one scene where Wheatley is talking like, "Aha, you've fallen into my trap. I hold all the cards and they're all full houses. But if you like walk out of the funnel," he goes, "But I'm like, what?" And if you do it enough times, he's just like, "All right, that's it. I'm not doing it again unless you go through with it." Is that you basically saying, "Okay, there's no more new dialogue. Move on, please"?
That would be, yes. That is sort of the crux of the questions that you've gotten to here. That would be Eric Wolpaw, main writer on that game, ran out of ideas for more things to say, because that, Wheatley is a great example of very judicious use of the amount of animation required to put a dialogue line into game, because he's just a ball. So Eric could basically just come up with an infinite amount of ideas as long as we were willing to pay actors to say them. So as far as I can tell, that would be what happened there.
All right, Harper. What do you think of Bethesda-style dialogue, where sometimes you're getting too many options just so that they give you a chance to explore lore?
Yeah, I think that that purely systemic dialogue is a space that someone could explore more. Like their problem is that it's kind of an everything game, right? Like if you had one Bethesda style town with that level of depth and it was so polished, like I don't want to say Firewatch polished because we were far from perfect in our own way, but just where you just consider everything the player could possibly do and you really, really polish it, I bet that would be a very successful AAA video game. It's amazing the world that they're able to build, like with the amount of variety of content that you can encounter in like Skyrim or a Fallout game. But I find it hard to scope down and polish that much work. Would be my warning. If you were like, let's say any of you were going to go start your own company after college or even while you're in school, whatever, and you're like, I want to make a new Fallout style game, like, okay, I wish you luck. There's like 1,000 people who make those and they are famously nothing but bug fests. So I hope that I hope you the best. But I think that if you were able to like make a single D&D town where every character had real motivations, like a Shenmue, if it was actually a good game. Oh, I'm sorry if there's Shenmue fans here. I think it's a very prolific game. But if you made a modern version of that game, where everything like had a rhyme and reason, and it was a high level of polish, it would be really, really successful. Maybe I should go make that.
If no one else right here has one, I have a quick one for you.
Sure.
So we're frequently constrained by time and money, being college student developers. How would you advise? What are key takeaways for getting the most out of like systems and writing when your amount of retakes with a VA or even the total amount of dialogue that you can have is limited? How would you advise getting the most bang for your buck?
That's a great question. So I was in college too once, and I've been also at small companies where we didn't have the budget for voice lines. Even larger companies like Double Fine, a lot of our games didn't have full voice because it's expensive and it's a lot of work. One thing, if you've played the game Night in the Woods, I think that's a fantastic game where you can make a lot of choices and you can feel very expressive, but also like you can show off quick little bits of writing in a stylistic way. The tool that they use to build that's called Yarn. I linked it in the talk and I'll send that out. But it's I think if you can lean on graphic design, this is a I don't know, it's kind of a shitty like cop out, but like it's really nice to look at any screenshot of that game. So I'm willing to sit there and read whatever the text is. Also, there's never very much of it at a time. But the characters get their opinions and ideas across clearly. I think that game's a great example of if you have like 4 people and a year to build something. I know they took a little longer than that, but it was a small team. Now that's also very long for a college project, I understand. Yeah, just focus on making the words that you're showing up on the screen not be annoying is my number one request for any like early storytelling project. Because people first off, they probably won't read what you write unless they like looking at it, and 2, that's that C1, I guess. They really will not read anything, and they won't listen to bad recording of audio as well. So that's a I know the problem well, and I wish you luck.
All right, we have we'll get you first and then you after.
What do you do if you ever need to have the character think a thought to themselves? I'm trying to think of a game, I can't, but I can think of plenty of games where they find a cop-out, like Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. You have, no, not Breath of the Wild, Skyward Sword, you have Fee, I believe she's called.
Yeah, that's Fee.
And anytime that you are supposed to have a thought, she'll come out of the sword and will say, hey, you're supposed to do this, or whatever.
Yeah.
If you don't have anyone, what would you suggest to do to make it seem realistic?
So this is a good question. I think also it's a question that Valve doesn't have great answers for, although we've tried it a few different ways. One thing that, like for example, the Half-Life series, the character cannot speak as a like rule of the game design, and thus they spend forever trying to make sure that other characters are telling you the important thing, that the important idea that you're supposed to be having. But Half-Life Alyx, which we just shipped, this was a struggle because we had no other Half-Life game up to that point had a character that spoke, and this was a character who in the franchise has spoken before, so we knew that we wanted her to speak. And then once we had that, then she could start talking to herself. As cliche as it is, it was, I don't know if anybody played it. It was a VR game, so I don't know if anybody played it, but watch a playthrough on YouTube. Okay, good. Watch a playthrough on YouTube if you haven't. It's I think there's actually some really good writing in there. But one thing that we did a lot was lean into just having a radio, which you might notice that the people who made Firewatch started working here when that game was rewritten. But having a radio or the way to talk to somebody who can just sort of, it's sort of similar to having your annoying pestering fairy come out of the sword or out of your pocket in Ocarina of Time, I guess another Zelda game where the hey listen comes from. Yeah, that goes back to kind of my other rule, which is like if it's annoying when it happens, it's really bad. So, but if it's nice, like if it's like your buddy's on the phone and they tell you a quick joke and they notice that you aren't where you're supposed to be when you need to be there, and they can just like mildly nudge you. It's like, hey, have you made it to the quarantine zone yet? Like, there's people dying out here, kind of goof. That can it can be like memorable and also mildly like it can train the player the way that you need.
Your start in the industry.
When did I start? I'm sorry. Was that the?
How did you start?
Oh, how did I start? I started in video games. I started working at EA in 2004. I was a texture painter for PS2 video games, and then I worked on Superman there for a while and became a UI engineer. So I was an artist. I had an art degree. I also have a computer science degree. It's anyway, whatever. And it was also a time in the industry when like you could go work at one of those big companies for a while and work your way up. It's kind of harder to do that now, as far as I can tell, which is a bummer because I like working with straight out of college people a lot. But a lot of straight out of college jobs now become sort of contract work, which is unfortunate. Anyway, I started as a texture painter, became a UI like designer and then programmer, and then moved in and I moved on to do graphics programming and the storytelling stuff in Madden, the presentation stuff, and then went over to Double Fine, went over to Campo, and on and on.
All right, we can take one more question if anyone has one. All right, front row.
All right, this is a very important question. It is very important. When is the next update to TF2?
That's a fantastic question. I'm not making a public statement regarding the development of Team Fortress. Although I will say there are people who are discussing that question, like right over there. Like I'm at the office, like there's a wall right there, but on the other side of that wall, there's people who are in a meeting about TF2 right now. So we'll see. I'm not on that team. I'm sorry.
Disappointing.
All right, thank you very, very much. This has been incredible.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal a post back from you.
Yep. I will. I don't know. Do I have to relinquish it?
I got it. We're good.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and I'll be sure to send out the slide deck at your convenience when you can get that to me.
Yep. I'll make sure the videos play when you're not logged into my Google account, and then send it your way.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have to ask the TigerDev people stay online, but you, of course, Ben, you're more than welcome to go home or whatever you do.
Yeah, well, I'm still at work. It's 4 o'clock here, or 5 now. I do actually have one question for you guys. I can't determine. I believe that your school mascot is the Tigers, but there also appears to be some sort of war eagle. Is that a norm? Does anyone know about this war eagle? Okay, is this a thing? Okay.
Yeah. Both. We have 2 mascots.
Okay, I see. All right. Well,
the mascot is the tiger. The eagle thing It's
that started at the football games, which I don't know.
Okay.
It's a really good football school. And
Fine. I grew up in the South. I get it.
Yeah. The War Eagle, it's a literal eagle that flies around the stadium. They like release it and it flies around. The first
Right. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. In case I give a talk again, I'll know which like pandering mascot to mention first.
Thanks again.
Yep. Good evening, everybody.
Alrighty, so real quick, appreciate you guys for staying on. So announcements. Logan, you're gonna have to remind me if I forget anything. So first and foremost, we have the fall break game jam coming up. That'll be October 7th, and it'll be 72 hours from the evening of October 7th until late in the afternoon, October 10th. And hopefully, some people are interested. That'll be a good time. We'll have a kickoff in Shelby on that day. And it's a sponsored game jam by Torch Technologies. So, there will be prizes, and we'll send out more information on that. But if that sounds like something you're interested in, I wanted to go ahead and get the date and time for that out. We also are starting a game jam team, a team designed to represent TigerDev at various game jam competitions. If that sounds like something that interests you, stay after the meeting and talk to us.
Okay. Playtest email.
Yes. Okay. So I'll send the link out to this in the Discord afterward. We're starting an official sign-up list for potential playtesters. Of course, if you guys are already in the club, you probably already see messages about that every now and then. But the idea is you can sign up for this internally, or you can send it to people who are like, "Hey, TigerDev sounds really cool. I don't want to play, or I don't want to make games, but I kind of want to play them." So we're hoping to have a way that all project leaders can get feedback by just sending their game out to everyone on this mailing list. Also, pay dues if you haven't already paid dues and you want to pay dues.
I think that's it.
All right.
Oh, well, we've already kind of mentioned this in the emails and stuff, but people doing projects next week is the project update.
Yes, it's a very important reminder.
Yeah. So yeah, just for those of you who don't know what those are, just make like a quick 5 to 10 minute slide presentation showing off what you've done so far, what you're planning on doing for the next month or so of development.
Yeah,
anything.
That should be good. So if you're on that team, just confer with your project leader, make sure you guys have something in place for that. And of course, if you can make it, come next week and we can see what everyone has been working on so far. So that's everything I have. So if you're on the Zoom and you're interested in the Game Jam team, just stay in the Zoom. Otherwise, you guys are free to go. So thanks for coming out.